And now, Nell and Bill, we're bringing on stage my bro, my fishing buddy, someone who used to love to take me down when we were kids and scrub my head with his knuckles. And that was because he's 10 years older than me. Our brother, Brother Bob. Hey, Bob. Like to know how has Nell and Billy influenced your life?
And of course, they practically raised all of us at one time or another, between Don and I and David. I think we all took advantage of their
Margaret.
Margaret. Uh, Billy he was our ice man. He hauled ice to
Literally.
our mother and dad, had a truck met. But he brought ice there, he drove a big old flatbed truck and had ice blocks in it. He covered it with a big tarp, and he made his round out through the country. And, he brought ice there, and that's where he and Nell met. Of course, she was very young. Of course, Bill was young too, and they met. And of course, Billy fell madly in love with Nell. They started going out, and probably one of the few people, if maybe the only one that Nell ever went with, as far as I know. There may have been someone else in there. I'm not sure, but Billy pursued her relentlessly over those, for a while. And of course, when they got married, she was like 15 or 16. I mean, she was young, very young. And I think she's been married 51 years
You
now.
basically grew up with them then, basically.
Oh, basically, they grew up together, And then Billy got out, and of course, they came out, and then he was working, trying to make ends meet on lots of things. And one of the things he would do every summer in order to make money would be he would go out to West Texas himself, just by himself. And he would pick cotton or pull cotton for that particular season. And whatever money he brought in, of course, he saved everything that he could. He'd bring it back, and basically that's what they lived on. It got started years later, I guess. Of course, Kathy was born, and at that time, of course, I was still a young boy. Really, I was going to school, but I was very young, and I remember how sick she was as a baby, and every night they were up with her, walking. She would cry, and of course they didn't know that anything was wrong with her at that point, because she was just a baby. She didn't learn as fast as the other children, and that's what triggered, this prognosis. Her, I think they're a lot stronger people for that.
And loving and
Oh yes, very much, and of course, their
Such the
rewards,
perfect parents
just
for
from that
her.
end of it, their rewards are just unlimited. They've been such loving parents all those years.
and so good for Kathy.
Yeah, I made sure the kids were taken care of, and then we wound up having the two boys, and they raised those kids just like they were all kids, nearly, they were all family, and they did everything together. And that's the way all their kids grew up. A very loving family, and then later on, uh, between all her brothers and sisters, we sort of graduated with Nell and Bill for whatever reason, going to school or maybe being stabilized for whatever reason. We wound up living with them over a period of time, some longer than others. Uh, I know the time that I spent with them and went to school at North Hopkins. They never made me feel like that I wasn't wanted. I always felt like I was loved. They fed and clothed us, and at the time we didn't realize it, but they really didn't have any money, but they always made do and did this type of thing. I didn't know that they were poor. I never did know they were poor when we were young.
We didn't even know we were poor.
Oh, I guess we really did. Always the big sister, of course. Not that didn't love Margaret any more than I did Nell, but Nell always, she's the one that sort of took charge of the lives of her, not only of her family, but her brothers and sisters, and made sure that we were happy and maybe were pointed down the right path. And they were, they're such a big influence on my life in that regard. And Billy was a stabilizing effect, because my immediate family, not that I didn't love my mother and loving fathers, you know, and my mother was certainly the most loving person in the world. But she wasn't a strong person, and Nell sort of took that piece of it over, I think. She took charge and made sure that, you know, we got the best available. Felt like that Nell was someone that I could go to at any time. And if I asked her to do something, you know, she would make sure if it was in her power that it was going to happen. That's the kind of stabilizing influence she had. She said, "Oh, Billy," and of course Billy was sort of a father image. You know, he provided for me, you know, going to school. You know, if I needed a car, he always had a car available. I have never heard him complain about anything. I remember one time I had a date. First time I'd ever gone with this particular girl, and it had rained and rained and rained. And she lived way off the road on this dirt road. And Bill had, I can't even remember the model Plymouth that he had, but he had this Plymouth. And he freely offered this car, you know, to go. I mean, I didn't own a car, so he said, "Well, just take our car." You know, he just handed it over. So I took the car, and sure enough, I tried to go down this dirt road and made it probably maybe 100 yards. I mean, I was right in the middle of the road, stuck, couldn't move backwards and forwards, and a pin came out of that little transmission lever. So I finally got where I couldn't even shift it backwards and forwards. So and it was snowing and sleeting that night in the winter time, and it was cold. I had on one of the rare times I ever wore a suit, I guess. I had on a suit on this particular day. And so I got out and sloshed down this road with my best shoes that I had, you know, and found this farmhouse. And woke the guy up. And he actually took me in his truck and took me to Nell and Bill, which was probably about 15 miles away at that point. Bill gets in the truck that he had. We go back to try to get his car out. And of course, I was high centered in the middle of the road. You couldn't even look under the car because of the mud. And Bill said, "Well, we can't do anything tonight. We'll just wait till the morning." And of course, by then everything was freezing and sleeting and snowing. So we come back in the morning. And he said, "I know what's the matter with it." And he actually dug a hole on that car with a shovel, crawled under there, put a pin in that, and then we pulled the car out, and we got out and went on, you know. And it was just things like that that I remember throughout my life with them. I guess I was probably about 7 or 8, maybe even 9. We lived at this little community called Tyra. And the only thing there, you know, was a few houses in the community. It was all farming community, and there was one general store. It had 2 gas pumps, and, you know, if you needed a little bologna or a loaf of bread or some eggs or feed for your cows or whatever, everybody went to this store. That's all that was there. And so you would, you know, like my mother and dad, they would charge a few things here and there, you know, and they probably built up a charge bill. I think it was either $5 or $6 that they'd wound up owing this guy, you know, under a charge. And I was down there, a little skinny kid, you know, didn't know anything. Anyway, the store owner had said something to me about, I think I went to get if I remember, I went to get a bulb for a light socket in the house. I think my mother had sent me down there for that. And the store owner didn't, his name was Lloyd Smitty. He didn't want to give this to me, and said something, I don't remember exactly what he said, but about us owing him money or something like that. So I was a little old kid, you know, that kind of scared me, to be quite honest. And so I, you know, barefooted kid, I get on, I run back to the house. And Nell was there, and she was about, well, at that time, she was probably about 14, maybe. Anyway, I said something about what happened. I tell you what, you have never seen it. This woman's, or this girl's personality completely changed. She got so irate about that, and I never will forget when I looked. She had on a little sack feed dress, you know, it came just about the knee, barefooted. Man, she is going down this road just as hard as she can. I mean, she has blood in her eye. She goes in this general store, and the owner, Lloyd Smitty, he's a kind of heavy-set guy, and he always wore khaki pants, khaki shirt, you know, belt, and he had a big old pot belly, and his pants kind of, and always hitching up his pants. He'd walk, hitch up his pants a little bit, kind of a nervous habit. Anyway, Nell lit into him. And she basically told him, she said, if you ever have anything to say about, us owing you money or whatever else, she said, don't you ever say anything like that to my little brother. And all these people were sitting around, they playing dominoes, whatever. I mean, it became deathly quiet in there.
So
I
you
heard
saw
this.
it.
I heard this from one of the guys that was there later. But anyway, she read him the riot act because he had said something about that to me, and protecting her, her big brother. And tell you what, Lloyd came out. He was hitching those pants. I mean, she was lit into him. He was walking around there. And he was hitching his pants up and down. Well, Nell, and I never will forget. But back there, when Nell came back, she was still mad. Came back to the house. We lived. That's where we lived on the corner there, and there's a big old pecan tree behind the house. And we just sort of rented this old leaky house. And Lloyd came up to that house later and brought, I can't remember what he brought, maybe some bread or ice cream or something else, sort of a peace offering, I guess. But it really bothered. He came up there and apologized and said, if we need to charge anything, we'll just come down there and charge it. That was all right with him, So that sort of ended that little saga. Got to school. I always make sure he had a sack lunch, whatever. Nell, she was always right there, and I know that. I look back later. I didn't realize at the time. I didn't know that they were poor, or we were poor. They, they didn't have the money to do all this, but they always made do. Say Billy would go out and work odd jobs and just anything that he could do, to make money. And transition, they moved to a little community up at Birthright called Hatchettville. And, I don't remember a lot about that place quite honestly. It was just an old house, and Billy's trying to make a living farming and doing different things. But he had this old 36 Ford. He'd taken the top completely off of it, and up just an old open vehicle, with an old wooden bed in back. And I remember specifically that vehicle because I would get a chance to drive it myself. I was still just basically a kid. From Hatchettville house up to the road and then back. And I thought, in its standard transmission, I thought that's the greatest thing that ever happened to me. I felt like a king driving that old car. Now everybody laugh at you if you saw it coming down the road. It was so funny looking. It was just an old home-built car. From that point, Bill wound up going to work at the post office. Of course, he started getting a little regular paycheck. And they moved up on the main road at Birthright, and Bill built them a small little house there at Birthright. And they lived in that for several years. Finally sold all that, built a home in Sulphur Springs, a lot nicer home, where basically they started raising their kids, their whole family. And from there built the house that they presently live in, which is here on College Street. I mean, just a beautiful home sitting on 7 acres.
So it's a rags to riches story, basically.
Yeah, it really is, and of course, from that point they wound up. Nell, of course, Bill at that point was a postman, carrying the mail. They had a paper route on the side to make extra money. So they worked long hours and hard hours all these years just to, make money. And Nell wound up going into business as in the ladies' dress business. She was a partner with a lady by the name of Lou. Name of the store being Lou Nails. And people to this day call her Lou Nail. They think that's her name. But they worked together as partners for, I don't know, a couple of years, ever how long it was. And then the other lady, who was financially stable, decided that she didn't really want to do this anymore. So Nell and Bill offered to buy her out, which they finally did. And then the economy and everything was good. So they started making some money in the dress business, learning the dress business. And of course,
they've been around the world, cruises.
They've been all over the United States with campers and motorhomes and cruises, and they've been to Europe, 2 or 3 times. And uh, have provided for their own children, you know, uh, tens of thousands of dollars over the years, you know, for their needs, for whatever it might be, and getting their family started.
They're loved by everyone, aren't they?
Yeah, they have so many friends, you know. It's I don't know anybody that just doesn't think that the sun rises and sets on either one of them. And when you think of them, even though Nell is, of course, my own sister, you know, I still think of them as synonymous with each other. You know, you can't think of one hardly without thinking of the other. And when you're talking about them, you have the same tendency to do that because all those years, you know, it's just been Nell and Bill. That's the way it's always been. And that's the way that it'll always be until, they pass on to something greater. But yeah, they've been a big, I can't tell you, what kind of influence they've been in my life. Uh, I just, I love Nell and Bill, gosh, it's just, it's hard to even put into words. I mean, it really goes deep, and I think all of our family is like that. The way we grew up may be our.
All because two people fell in love.